Hello, Ron. Charlie, how are you? Good. All right, it's 7 o'clock, and I am going to call. Are we being
Recording
recorded?
in progress.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, and I am calling the April 11th, 2022 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. Ms. Chain, would you please call the roll?
Osberger,
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder,
Pleasantly here.
Coleman,
Here.
Fertoni, Katchenberger, Moran,
Here.
Shuren,
Here.
Shaken.
I'm sure that Mr. Shaken is on his way. He was present virtually at our last Finance Committee meeting, so my guess is he's midway. The first item on our agenda is a public hearing regarding the 22-23 budget. Ms. Chain, would you read the call?
The Mansfield Town Council will hold a public hearing at 7 p.m. at their regular meeting on April 11th, 2022 in the Council Chamber of the Audrey P. Beck Building to solicit comments regarding the proposed fiscal year 2022-23 budget. At this hearing, persons may address the Town Council and written communications may be received. Copies of the proposed budget and related materials are on file and available at the Town Clerk's Office, 4 South Eagleville Road, Mansfield, and are posted on the town's website, mansfieldct.gov. Dated at Mansfield, Connecticut, this 4th day of April, 2022.
Thank you. Now, I notice we do have some people in the audience. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak to the budget? Ms. Silander.
Did you want me to provide the expedited flyover or skip the presentation entirely? You're-
Why don't we skip the presentation entirely?
It would have been the best 12 slides of your life, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's all right.
Is it on?
Well,
Green light.
oh,
There you go. Yep.
that's all. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much first for the work that you all do here. I really appreciate it. I'm speaking tonight as a private citizen and not as a member of the Board of Ed or as anything else. My name is Nancy Seilander, and my husband also agrees with what I'm going to state. I live at 30 Silver Falls Lane in Stores, and I'm asking that you keep in the budget on page 208 the line item of $150,000 that's under community development for the Hunting Lodge Neighborhood Plan. Note that this is not only Hunting Lodge Road, which I believe Linda Painter explained at a previous meeting, that is under consideration, but the neighborhoods north and west of the university. We are actually thrilled that this is a priority, as in the past 30 years since living on the northwest side, we lived 15 years over on the northeast side, but now we're on the northwest side of Mansfield, we have seen a substantial proportion of family housing on Hunting Lodge and on adjacent streets turn over to rentals. And many, if not most of the landlords, are not town residents. Indeed, on our own cul-de-sac of 7 houses, 2 are now rentals, and actually I fear for another 2 that will probably be coming up soon. And the 2 houses directly facing our road are also rentals. This is no way to create and maintain a neighborhood. Moreover, there has been an ongoing issue of blighted properties in this area, especially along Hunting Lodge Road. In the Mansfield Vision for Tomorrow, it specifically alludes to neighborhoods with diverse housing adjacent to campus. Our diversity has taken a hit when so much of the housing stock has now become rentals, and when resident homeowners receive unsolicited mailings encouraging them to sell. There is also talk of new businesses in the Depot campus area, and of course, talk of moving what is Wyndham Tech to the former prison area. We are also losing our neighborhood school. All of this will have an impact on not only Hunting Lodge, but the adjacent neighborhoods to the north and west. Please, eliminating the line item, this line item would be extremely short-sighted. Putting this off once again until other plans are in the works risks this part of town becoming even more blighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the budget?
I feel very uncomfortable going after that. That was pretty darn good. I'm 69 years old. I don't do too many things for the first time ever now.
Before you, could you state your name and address for the
I am
record?
sorry. Well, it gives you an example. I'm Bill Temecco. I'm at 315 Hunting Lodge Road, up in Stores. Well, you know that. I live right next to Goodwin Elementary School. And as I said, I don't do too many things for the first time. This is the first time for me to address a town council like this. This is kind of cool and a little nerve-wracking. I want to also speak in support of the Hunting Lodge Road Neighborhood Plan, although I think it's a bit of a misnomer. There's a lot more up there, although Hunting Lodge Road should be a very famous piece of road there for everybody here. I'll tell you why in a minute. I live next to the school. My grandmother sold the property to the town for the school, got $8,000 for it back in 1956. My dad always said, this is great, he said, because you always have a good neighbor sitting next to you. And now it's been true. The school's been a really good neighbor. And I'm going to feel very uncomfortable and sad when I can't have my coffee in front of my picture window and watch the kids at school playing. It's depressing a little bit. I remember the school being built. It's probably one of my earliest memories. I was 4 years old at the time, and the bulldozer ran over my cat. And I still wanted my dad to put a post-traumatic stress syndrome suit into the county, to the town for that, but he didn't, and I haven't gotten over it yet. One of the guys here in place, I haven't learned all your names yet. I'm a little wacko. I'm back from Miami. I lived all my life in Miami and retired to Connecticut. I haven't learned all your names yet, but somebody said that and I'll paraphrase a little, the train's already gone. that the neighborhood has already changed over. And that's a lot true for the lower part of Hutton Lodge Road. And from my eyes, it's painful because you remember the Weatheralls, the Prues, the Penners at the bottom of the thing, the Glances, the Blicks, Dini's, Giannopoulos, all the way up the road, up close to me, Trenkas and Tildens and everything. I don't know a single person on the road anymore. A lot of times at the lower part of the road, it's all students, and for those people who own those houses would be really sad seeing what they've become. It's really painful to watch. Anyways, the upper part of Hutton Lodge Road, the areas along with Birch Road and Westgate and their road up there, Silver Falls, it's all still beautiful. There's beautiful houses up there. And I think this idea of being proactive at looking at what we can do to hold off the developers. We all get these cards almost every day. Every week we get the cards. We'll buy your house. We won't even look at it. We'll just buy it. There's going to be developers that come in and they're going to make suggestions to you, and you're not going to be able to say no to it because you have a plan for the whole area to make decisions of what should be done with the area. So, long story short, and I'm rambling on, I think it should have been called the Plan for Stabilization of the West Cape campus neighborhood after Goodwin. And I really hope that you don't take $150,000 out of the budget. We actually look like we're doing real good this year. And please find the money, keep it in, and let, I guess her name is Linda. Linda, take a real good look at the neighborhood with us and see what they can do to help us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Get list now.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on the budget? Mr. Silander. I forgot to say that these are 5-minute, there's a 5-minute limit, and go right ahead.
I'm John Silander. I live at 30 Silver Falls Lane in that section of town. I'm speaking as an individual, not in my capacity as a member of the Conservation Commission. I'm also going to speak in support of the Hunting Lodge study plan that I feel very strongly should be part of the budget this year. We have watched over the last 20 years in terms of that whole area, including all of lower Hunting Lodge Road, that has transformed from families to entirely student rentals at this time. This is, I think, a very serious problem for this town. If we're going to attract families to come in here, if we're going to support the school system, we have to have a community that is not just going to be attractive to students, but also attractive to families and other members. A couple of years ago, Forbes magazine said that for each state, they named the top city or town to retire in, and for Connecticut, it was Storrs. And we have no plan in terms of developing housing for retirement people. There's just no places that can be done. We're over committed to student housing. And as a consequence of turning over the houses along Hunting Lodge, has been a long-term problem with blight of many of the residences there. We also have to deal with a decommissioned school. What's going to happen to that school? Is that going to turn into more student housing rent opportunities? I think that we're going to have to come up to grips. This is a sort of a neglected area of town, that northwest sector of town. We're going to have to come to grips with making this more attractive, not just to students, but the larger population, more diverse population, retirement, and families. Otherwise, we're going to be in terrible shape as far as this town is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council on the budget? All right, seeing nobody, do we have any written or phoned-in requests for communications? Okay, thank you. And I will declare this hearing on the budget to be closed. I just want to point out that I came to Mansfield in 1965 and lived in student housing on Hunting Lodge Road, which was even worse than what's there now. So bad it was torn down. The next item on the agenda is opportunity for the public to address the council on any matters. Anybody here who wishes to address the public on any other matter? All right, seeing nobody, I will declare that closed as well. The next item is the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A number of the items that are included in my written report, I'm going to sit tight on because they have a way of coming up later on in today's agenda. So just a few items to touch on now. One is that I just want to make sure that the council's aware that we had a recent meeting. Myself, Superintendent Lyman, incoming Superintendent Dart, representatives from Colliers and Newfield Construction, just to kind of go over the construction timeline for the new school. And so we continue to monitor that closely. And wanted to, on the topic of the new school, a couple other items. It's a lot to wade through, and certainly no expectation on my part that you would have done so before tonight's meeting, but hopefully everybody saw in their inboxes the information that was circulated. This was information that was compiled in response to Councilor Coleman's questions about the suitability of the southeast school site for the new elementary school. I won't obviously restate all the questions, but Colliers and TSKP Studios and some of the subcontractors involved conferred to try to make sure that all the relevant information and the analysis that was done about site suitability related to Councilor Coleman's questions was compiled and synthesized in a way that was more easily digestible. So I would just say, as you have a chance to review that, if there are any other follow-up questions, we certainly will be happy to track down answers to those questions. Also on the topic of the new school, the mayor and myself joined a couple other members of the school building committee, I think it was last week, to do a walking tour of the project. Certainly has come a long, long way. It's really impressive to see inside the building. Just a lot of different aspects of the building and construction ongoing, whether it's, the air vapor barriers being installed in the exterior walls to hanging drywall, continue installation of mechanicals. Now, as of today, I think today was the first day, the intersection redesign work at Warrenville Road and Stores Road. So a lot of different aspects of the project happening concurrently. So that's definitely good to see. Just a couple other items here, if you'll bear with me. I want the council to know that today the panel of folks, the sort of internal review committee, if you will, for the aerial pumper, the apparatus is being purchased with a Small Cities grant, a little over $1 million. Well, right around $1 million. We had our meeting to basically confer on all the individual scoring that each of us did for the various proposals that were submitted by vendors, and we've actually identified a vendor that seems to be the most advantageous. So a little more vetting is to be done and terms to be reached, but looks like we're moving closer and closer to having that apparatus and on the way to being built out, which will take, unfortunately, the better part of 2 years, it could be, before it actually comes online. That's just the timeline for these things. 480 days is about the best case scenario, and upwards of 600 days is perhaps more likely. So that was my thought too. I didn't get that. But anyway, so patience is a virtue. So we want to obviously get the process started so that we can have the apparatus come online as soon as possible. I just wanted to make sure the council is also aware that the road and pedestrian safety audit I think it was shared with you all recently that State Connecticut DOT approved our application to have a road safety audit done for a segment of 195 and 275, basically in the downtown area. Work on that is kickstarting now as well with the consultant that was assigned to the project. So we're looking forward to having the findings of that really important work compiled in the near future. And I'll end my report there and take any questions the council has on the rest of the report.
Any questions for Mr. Aylesworth? Berthelot, followed by Mr. Coleman.
All right, just out. Where will the audit be? What area will they be auditing?
It's 195 and 275, basically in the sort of the downtown area. Yeah.
And my next question is about the pilot program, the police mentoring program. Could you tell us a little bit about that? It's in the Human Services on page 5.
Oh, you're talking about the
It's a middle school program, I believe.
Pinwheel, yeah, okay, Police Mentoring Program. This was a late addition by Ms. Schneider, so I haven't gotten a full brief on it yet. Happy to get more information if you're interested.
Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, I got a few questions. On the town manager's proposed budget, fiscal 2022-2023, it seems that many towns get started on their budget season as early as January. I would like to see this council in this town start the budget season earlier so we can go over in detail all the line items. I see that you had an interview on ILI. I took the liberty to listen to it. I think you do a great job on that every time you speak. I noticed that you did mention the Helping Hands program. Did you get any response to that?
Did I get any response? You mean additional uptick in?
Correct.
Nothing has been reported to me by Ms. Painter or her staff in terms of elevated level of interest based on my appearance on the program.
Thank you. On the school building down at Southeast, I noticed Madam Mayor asked a question about vapor barriers and some bubbles that occurred down there on the exterior. How does that happen? And can you remove the humidity from the interior of the building prior to putting the vapor barrier on so you don't get those bubbles?
That's a technical question I'd have to do more research on. I know when we had our tour, I believe it was stated that where those bubbles, as you described them, occurred, that they kind of go back over that and sort of do spot fill in and fixes, if you will. But in terms of, you know, how common that should be in the course of like normal application of doing that, and whether or not the number of bubbles that they've had to address kind of falls within what you would expect. That's a question I'd have to look into further.
Yeah, could you follow that up for me? See if moisture could have been removed, you know, from the enclosed
Or
building.
as a preventative measure,
Yeah,
you're saying, to
preventative.
avoid that
Yes,
situation.
correct.
Happy to ask that question.
I believe when I asked the question, the answer included information that it wasn't caused by interior moisture, it was caused by something else, and that they were repairing that. But
Okay,
That's only my recollection of the answer I got.
I would appreciate a follow-up regardless. Thank you.
Will do.
Intersection of 195 and 89, I see they've got started on that. Looks like some yards are going to get disturbed pretty good over there. Was there a public hearing on that issue at any point in time? Or should have there been a public hearing to notify people on that intersection work?
I don't believe there was a public hearing done at the time. I don't believe any of the work in this case is happening outside the town's right of way.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
I got another one.
Okay, Mr. Coleman,
Just
go
gotta
right
look at my
ahead.
notes. boilers in the community center, have they been replaced, or are we talking about replacing them?
I believe they have been replaced. I believe
Okay.
those replacements have been completed.
Okay, and those were all done in-house, correct?
I can confirm that with facilities, but I believe so, yes.
On the school water, I'm glad to see that you had outside vendor take a look at that situation. I still have the question, Connecticut Water as the operator, what happened really to get to this point? To have a vendor come in and make recommendations if Connecticut Water should have been the one making the recommendations all along.
I think, you know, I had a chance to speak about this a little bit one-on-one last week, as we discussed the roles and responsibilities of the town as the owner of the system and Connecticut Water as the operator, that there's, you know, some lines of demarcation are clearer than others, and as far as, you know, the condition of the system, you know, the state of Connecticut and DEEP and PURA, the regulating, you know, agencies in this case, I believe all think that our system is in, you know, what would be considered good working order. That doesn't mean that there aren't issues that arise that we've obviously been encountering with power outages that we're trying to deal with. But I don't think at this time, I believe it's been 6 or 7 years, if I recall, what Alan Corson informed us, it's been 6 or 7 years since Connecticut Water took over as the operator. And as the operator, again, they have a certain range of responsibilities, just as we have a certain range of responsibilities. And I think that, you know, our belief is that over the course of the relationship, that Connecticut Water as the operator has basically been implementing what you'd expect as an operator.
Thank you.
Yep.
All I have.
Any further questions? Okay, the next item on our agenda is reports and comments of council members. I don't have any. Does anybody else have any report or comment? Nope. Okay, it's going to be an easy evening. We next come to the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda, 2 sets of minutes, an application for the Historic Documents Preservation Grant, which is a grant that we apply for every year. It's designed to help us preserve the town's records. And then the Fair Housing Policy and Resolution, another item which we do on a regular basis. It establishes the town's policies on fair housing, and it includes a fair housing action plan. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. Shaken?
Unless there's items that folks want to pull off of it, I move to adopt consent agenda.
Is there a second? Second by Ms. Berthelot. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the consent agenda, please raise your hand. All right. Moving on, the new business. This one's interesting. Mr. Aylesworth, this is our municipal facilities needs assessment study. We have been waiting for this with bated breath. So please introduce the subject and our presenter.
Sure. We're joined by Richard Sipic from TSKP Studios. I know I've been giving the council periodic updates on what I keep calling, you know, phase 1, first phase of this municipal facilities needs assessment study. Given where we are in the process of the current budget development season, I thought it would be a good opportunity for TSKP to do a check-in with the council and provide, you know, what I'm going to stress is very, you know, high-level kind of initial findings and recommendations at this point. Nothing is in any way locked in stone, so this is sort of, I guess, a teaser, if you will, of what's coming out of this first phase of the project. But I think Richard and his team have, you know, basically brought it far enough along that it would be a good time to check in with the council and give the council a sense of, you know, where, sort of broad brush strokes, where some of these findings are going, so you have a better understanding or better context of what is being recommended for sort of the next phase of this work, which, as you all know, has been included in my proposed budget for next year. So without any further ado, I'm going to try to navigate to Richard's presentation.
Go to
PowerPoint. and we will,
Are a glutton for punishment to come before two boards in this town.
It's a pleasure. Come before the boards in this town. I like working in this community. First, let me say thank you to Mr. Aylesworth, and good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Sure. My name is Richard Sipek. I'm a registered architect in the state of Connecticut. I'm a partner with a firm called TSKP Studio. And at Mr. Aylesworth's suggestion, I am here to give you an interim update on the work that we've been doing, which is the facilities use and program study of 12 facilities in the town of Mansfield. Oh, great. Thank you very much. We have on the team of consultants that have been looking at your facilities, CHA. It's a firm, a civil engineering firm, because of their site expertise. They've also done fire departments in the past, so we brought them in as a member of our team. We also have CMTA. That is probably a familiar name to some of you. They are a well-respected national firm with a focus on energy conservation and energy management. And we started by meeting with your facilities director, Alan Corson, and obtaining from him quite a number of existing reports that he has. And then we continued with having meetings with various professionals, the town planner, development director, the DPW director, engineering department, fire chief. It's a long list of people that we met with. We also went out and looked at every one of these facilities, some multiple times. And then we prepared plans of those facilities, a site plan showing its current configuration. This is by no means a final report. It's an interim report. As Mr. Aylesworth said, it would be a good time to review this with members of the council and get some feedback. Whether I get that feedback tonight or as a follow-up through Ryan's office, that would be fine. Our plan is to continue with the study until July, and at that point we will be delivering to you the final report. What 12 facilities are we looking at? These are the 12 facilities in town, starting with number 1, which is the municipal building, and then 2 through 5 are a number of buildings at Public Works, including the animal shelter. And then we have the maintenance shop, which is located on the Depot campus of UConn. That maintenance shop is leased space. It's not actually an owned facility owned by the town, but it's leased facility, but we did look at that. The Goodwin School, the Vinton School, which is at the southern end of town. And then we have, let's see, where's number 9? I don't see number 9. That's a little embarrassing. Well, this is an interim report. We'll get this map corrected. There's 2 number 10s. That explains it. Sometimes arithmetic is hard. So Fire Station 107 should be number 9. And then we have Fire Station 207, which is number 10, and then Fire Station 307, number 11. And the 12th facility is the Senior Center. I asked during this tour of the fire stations, why are they numbered 107, 207, and 307 instead of 1, 2, 3? And it had to do with, I guess, the other fire stations that are using dispatch services. And so this is a historical number that's associated with these fire departments. Let me give you an overview. I know this is difficult to read, but if you look at the bottom line, you can see that we're talking about 52, almost 53 acres of area and over 172,000 square feet of facility. That's a lot of facility. What jumps out, in my opinion, to me is, as I mentioned before, line 6, the maintenance building is actually leased space. And right now you have a favorable lease to use that facility. That's, I guess, nicknamed also the town's attic. It's a place where lots of things are stored. And as attics are, they get filled. But that facility contains the maintenance shop, carpentry, plumbing, and so on. I'll show you a little bit later. Another thing that jumps out at me is your fire departments, items 9, 10, and 11, are very small. You can see they're under 2 acres. That immediately jumped out at me because that means you have no room for expansion, no room for big improvements on those sites. And another thing that jumps out at me is how many facilities have public water, only 4, and how many have sewer, and you only have only 4, which means that there is some limitation on the use of those sites, the expansions of the sites that have well and septic systems, or perhaps a change of use on those sites. So you have some limitations there. I'm going to jump to what I think preliminary recommendations. These are my preliminary recommendations. I'm looking for feedback and priorities. I think the first 3 items that I listed here, not necessarily in that order, but I think that you have some needs on the existing municipal building site. It's a very valuable site because it's adjacent to Storrs Center and the development that has been happening along Storrs Road. One possibility is to upgrade the town hall to use better use of space, as well as address the mechanical needs that are in this facility. We could look at it as a renovation project versus new construction, and that would be something that should be looked at in greater detail when you get into the next phase of this study. That's the present need. The future needs, you might look at doing a public-private partnership. I know that that's what's happened in other areas of town. There's a great need to, or there could be a desire to have some commercial space built into this site. There's also potentially a need to relocate the senior center rather than keeping the senior center where it presently is. The next item, which is the existing public works site. The existing public works site has a number of needs. You have garages there that do not operate in an efficient way, and they all have backup requirements of these very large public works vehicles. It's not the ideal arrangement. The ideal arrangement would be to have drive-through garages. As we actually observed in another town, we did visit the town of Woodstock. They built a facility that has drive-through vehicle bays, which is a much better way to operate public works garages. And also, we should think about in the future of reserving some space on the public works site, the DPW site, for a future maintenance shop. I don't know how long your lease arrangement will last with UConn on the Depot campus. If that lease is terminated or you're asked to vacate the premises, you're going to have to find a space. So I think future planning for the DPW site should consider adding a maintenance shop to that facility. And it also makes sense to have that personnel close to the DPW operations. Also on that site, you should consider upgrading the animal shelter. It's a very old facility. I think locating it in its present location is okay. It's a good location for an animal shelter. But you might consider building a facility that could be a regional center, something that could be shared with other municipalities in town. In that case, you'd probably have to enlarge it. The third item at the top first priority box is a new public safety building site. You do need a new main fire station, one that has emergency operations capacity, and one that is more state-of-the-art and also has safe vehicular circulation around it. Only one of your fire stations, the smallest one, has a drive-through garage bay. The others are all back up, which is not ideal. You also, when you are considering a new fire station, and the existing sites are too small, so I'm talking about the possibility of finding another site for a new main fire station, you should consider including a new police station as part of that overall plan. That would require about 5 acres. And if you compare that to what you currently have, you do need another site. And the other priorities here on this list, again, this is only our opinion. Existing Goodwin Elementary School, I think, well, I heard this evening, coincidentally, some possible uses for Goodwin, that site. We think it is reusable for other purposes. In the short term, it even could be used as swing space. If you are considering renovating, let's say, Town Hall or another facility, I understand that you're having a middle school study done right now to renovate that facility. Goodwin could be swing space, and that would shorten the duration of renovation at the middle school. Long term, I think you could convert that building to other uses. One possibility is an early childhood or youth services facility, or potentially as senior housing. The next 3 are the fire stations. I think they should be maintained until you determine a new fire station and where that should be built. In the short term, I think you could easily add a wash bay for all of your town vehicles at fire station number 2. It's the only one of your fire stations that has public water and public sewer, so it's easily possible to create a wash bay. Existing senior center, continue to maintain the facility until you determine whether or not it would make sense to locate a new senior center on the municipal site. There is some sense to that. There could be a synergy between the senior center and the community center. And you could then assign the existing site for the senior center to the housing authority. And lastly is the existing Vinton School site. In the short term, it could be used as swing space for work elsewhere that needs renovation and swing space. But in long term, we think it's probably not going to be used for any town facility. It may be appropriate to look at repurposing that site, perhaps as single-family lots. The next chart, it just gives you some impressions of your facilities. This building was originally a one-story school building. It occupies a lot of site area. I think you should consider stacking, creating a building that is stacked, multiple floors, and perhaps a 3-story building with the upper floors as municipal offices, lower floors as public-private partnership. And in that kind of configuration, that is built in future expansion space, should you need to provide space for your municipal offices. Other things that might jump out here is that the maintenance shop, in addition to being the attic, it is a carpentry shop, a plumbing shop, electrical and mechanical equipment, but it also serves as a storage facility, your plan room. We found a lot of plans of the existing facilities in that building. It really needs to be an environmentally controlled storage facility, and that does not exist in that building. The senior center is a building that has been expanded over and over again. The result is that it's just a complicated building with circulation that is not very direct. In fact, to get from one part of the building to another part of the building, you have to go outside, which is not ideal. And many areas do not comply with ADA requirements. Okay, let's look at the municipal building. As you can see, it's set back far from the road. In front of the building is a parking lot. We looked at this parcel, and we started looking at this parcel, which is a separate lot from the rest of this area. And this lot is what contains this U-shaped municipal building and the parking lot in front of it. But when we looked at it, we thought, well, we really should be considering more. There's another parcel adjacent to it, just to the west of it, and that's where you have your community center. And I know that there's a playground that's been built here, and some expansion, some renovation of the parking area has been done. And when you plan a new facility, if that's the direction you agree is the way to go, then you should be looking at this entire area. You should think of it as one campus, and your plan should be done in a way that creates some synergy and some mutual benefit. It's obviously adjacent to E.O. Smith. E.O. Smith has some needs, although that's not part of the study. Maybe there could be some synergy created between your facility needs and their facility needs, specifically parking. Across the street are some apartments, and I understand that there is some thought being given to that being developed further, and so maybe there could be some synergy created between that development in the future, along with the municipal campus. The building has about a little over 27,000 square feet, one story. It has a number of departments. We counted all the departments. We measured all of the floor areas for them. It's not a very efficient use of space. Some space has been increased by grabbing space across the hallway. For example, it contains also the police department. Police department is very often they have visitors who are uncomfortable visiting the police department, going all the way through the municipal building, and then trying to have an issue resolved in that building. There's also youth services located here, and the Eastern Highlands Health Department. Now, the Eastern Highland Health Department meets the needs, I think, of 10 towns and municipalities, and I'm not sure that this is the ideal location for that kind of office. Maybe it should be located somewhere else. We haven't done a plan to look at how to reconfigure this, but that would be part of the study as we continue, and compare that with a new building. And if you were to consider a new building, where would you put it? So this aerial photograph shows the footprint of the municipal building. It also shows an area just to the east of it that could be a potential site for a municipal center. This footprint represents a 3-story footprint, part of which could be commercial use or other use in addition to municipal use. And the reason I say that it's a good location is because it could just pick up on what's happening on this street already, and it would be a very, very, very valuable parcel to develop here. And other possibilities are create a senior center. This is one potential location for senior center. Another potential location adjacent to the community center. And then if this is the strategy you would take, instead of renovating the municipal building, you could, after building a new facility, remove the municipal building and then have a multi-story parking garage created here, which would serve the commercial use, the town use, as potentially shared with E.O. Smith as well. Okay, let's look at the DPW site. The DPW site is actually part of a much larger parcel. It's a 93-acre parcel that also has the middle school, Centennial Pond, and the DPW site, which is located right here. Adjacent to the DPW facility is the animal shelter, which is located here. Okay, what are the needs? The needs are really to create 30 garage bays, some for large vehicles, some for small vehicles, ideally situated so that you could drive through the facility straight through without having to back up. There's also a need to create the proper maintenance support systems, oil, for example, waste oil management, even creating an accessible staff area. Right now it's located on 2 floors, not ideal. And also in this yellow area, that represents the kind of square footage you would need to create a new maintenance shop on this site, should you want to This is a good location for the DPW facility. We did talk to the DPW director and staff at this facility. Is it possible to replace these buildings with more energy efficient, safer buildings? Only if we create a swing space for all of these vehicles. And so they thought, well, it could be on a vacant school site, or it could be on the town dump site as another possibility. But that should be factored in to the planning for this facility. This is Goodwin Elementary School. We looked at a number of things. Could it be repurposed as housing? Yes, it could, very well. This is a senior housing concept for Goodwin. You could easily get 20 one-bedroom apartments. These would be very generous sized apartments, 950 to 1,000 square feet, all fully accessible. Or you could do two-bedroom apartments, senior housing in this building, and here we're showing 14 two-bedroom units. So it's possible to have a mixture of two-bedroom and one-bedroom, should you want to consider that. It also has potential community space for the residents as well as members of the community. Let's look at Vinton. Vinton, we honestly don't see that being reused for another purpose. Part of our team does include a real estate advisor. We haven't brought them into the picture just yet, but certainly they could advise us, for example, if this site became single-family lots, you could get 14 single-family lots, and this would be the size of the lots that are in the current planning and zoning regulations for this zone. We did have a conversation with Linda Painter, your town planner, but you don't have to have single-family lots. You could have a planned residential development here, and that's subject to whatever developer proposes, but I think this is one possibility. We did look at the middle school capacity because the question came up. We also had meetings with Superintendent Lyman, and we did bring up the question of the middle school renovation, which is not part of our study, but we were aware of it. And so we said, well, you could certainly, if you look at the programmatic requirements of the middle school, you have a total of 4 grades, grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, and each of them have a number of classrooms and support spaces. 6 classrooms plus support spaces. So, for example, if you had Goodwin being used as swing space, you could easily achieve 2 grades, house 2 grades in the facility during the renovation of the existing middle school. And this diagram illustrates 12 classrooms plus support spaces. The same thing for Vinton. Vinton could house 2 classrooms should you want to use those Vinton or Goodwin as swing space. And this is just a conceptual diagram of how a fire department combined with a police department could function. On one side, you would have fire support and garage. On the other side, you would have police support and garage, but you would have one common entry with reception to either police or fire, and you would have common facilities between, for instance, a training space or classroom space, meeting space, and that could also function as a command center, an emergency command center. Okay, following this is an appendix of a number of diagrams, such as the plan for the town hall, some review of the mechanical electrical systems that were done by CMTA, and an energy use intensity analysis. This shows the energy use of this building, and as you can see, it's, well, first let me explain the reason for the 4 bars. They went back and looked at the facility department's records of energy use for 2018, 2019. Those were the pre-COVID years. And then there was a drop in energy use, well, because a lot of people were working from home, I'm assuming, for the years 2000 and 2001. We haven't really gone through the entire analysis because I'm curious myself, why it dropped only this much. I don't know how occupied the buildings were during COVID, but you were using energy, using the building, or just operating the building. I would have hoped that this energy consumption would have dropped, but our engineers are telling us, no, this is what the records show. Is an energy use of 100 or a little over 100 or around 80 or 65 good? No. You really want to hit probably anywhere from 15 to 20. That's a much more efficient building. So you do have some energy inefficiencies in this building. At this point, I'm going to stop because there are similar charts and graphs for the other parcels, but I could consume a lot of your time. I gave Ryan a copy of this PowerPoint, so I would ask members of the council to, as soon as they're posted or Ryan makes them available, to spend some time with it, knowing that this is the draft. It's only my first impression so far. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Kachenberger.
So, thanks, this is really interesting. I noticed there's one facility that's absent from your list. I think there's just one, and I understand why it is. It's our newest facility, which is the community center. You didn't do a sort of facility assessment. of
Two,
that.
actually. The library was also outside the
Library is
scope.
also absent. But as you are considering major sort of changes to this campus here, the town hall and the community center, I'm just wondering how the community center's use as a building, not just its building, factored into your decision. So I've long thought that locating a senior center on top of or below a new town hall on this site would make a lot of sense. Youth services also needing a place to have more than an office, and being able to utilize some of the stuff that's at the community center in a way that they don't right now has also made a lot of sense. And so I'm just sort of curious what, not just from a acreage and where there's a footprint available for a building perspective, but from a where does it make sense for certain types of services to live perspective, whether anything jumped out at you as things that are sort of in the wrong place that could be put in the right place that have needs and that kind of thing.
Well, what struck me is that the senior center could benefit by being adjacent to the community center. Community center has meeting space, that has recreational space, which is lacking in the senior center. There's also a food service component in the senior center, which needs serious upgrading. And so that also could work very easily with the community center. I think there's a great symbiotic relationship that could happen between the two operations. I didn't look at if there are any deficiencies in the community center. It's not part of the work that we've been assigned to do. We can certainly look at that if Ryan asks us to see what other things may be necessary. But I think what my impression is that you could have more density on this parcel, meaning more activity on this parcel, if you are willing to go to 3 stories for the town hall, which makes all the sense in the world. Less roof area, less foundation, and you could put a lot of uses in it. And I think they just make a lot of sense working together. Youth services also benefits by being next to the community center, and there could be a wonderful relationship between youth services and seniors and the community center. That was my reaction.
So that would be new construction, not renovation.
Correct.
Mr. Kachenberger.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you very much for the work already. It's very helpful. 2 questions, one specific and one general. The specific question is, in terms of the public safety building with police, currently we have state troopers. We considered several years ago creating our own municipal force. We rejected that option. We come back depending on what the state does with the state troopers program. Town Troopers program, but the specific question is this looks very large for 7, 8, or 9 state resident troopers and something we wouldn't need. And in part because I don't, at least at this point, do not think we should have a municipal police department. I don't want to build a building that would, that for something that we haven't even considered. So that's the specific question.
Sure. So maybe I wasn't clear. I think you need a fire station. I think you need a new fire station. My recommendation is you find a 5-acre parcel for that fire station. And I also recommend that you plan that fire station in such a way, should you in the future, not immediately, but should you in the future want to combine that with a police facility, you have that option. So that was my line of thinking.
It means like a later addition if it should become necessary?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. And then my, thank you. And then my general question is, when you talk about the priorities, you had first, second, what are the factors that go into it? Is it based on just the deterioration of the particular building, or do you weigh, and if so, how, the value of, the public works garage versus the senior center in addition to the overall physical maintenance? So how do you determine those priorities?
Well, I think we all do that together. I don't think I can do that for you. I think that I'm sharing with you my opinion.
Right.
But I think you need to then determine amongst yourselves and amongst members of the public what the priority should be. I mean, I envision this as just the beginning. The next steps would be to decide what the priorities should be for additional study.
Right, no, I understand that. But how did you determine that they were first? Were you looking at what criteria when you set out first priority, second, as recommendations, which I appreciate? How did you decide, what is the criteria you use to decide first and second?
Well, I didn't rank them in any particular order, but those 3 rows in my mind as being the most important after I saw the DPW facility. I think that it physically is a problem. And because of the circulation, because of the safety, because of the staffing requirements, and it's not planned for the possible addition of a maintenance facility should you not be at the Depot campus in the future. So for all of those reasons, I think that emerged in my mind because of its needs. It emerged as one of the major priorities in my mind. The senior center, I think trying to rehabilitate that facility is going to cost a lot of money. I think, unfortunately, it's been built not as a concept from day one. Well, maybe it was, but then it was added onto and added onto and added onto, which is not the way to have an efficient operation. And so that emerged to me as, look, you're going to have to face it. You're going to have to address it. I think there are water problems in that facility that I've mentioned before, mechanical issues. By the way, none of your facilities have mechanical ventilation. The only way you ventilate those buildings is by opening the windows, which is just not enough. You need to move air in all of your facilities. But in senior center, that's especially true. I think there are a number of deficiencies in that building that need to be addressed. And so, again, because of my impression of the need, I think you should consider relocating it and then giving up that property to, let's say, the housing authority. And then finally, the municipal center. I just keep looking at this parcel and I keep thinking, this is a very valuable parcel. And it's not very efficiently used. It's got a surface lot. It's got a 1-story building. I think you can make it denser and make it also attractive to other users, perhaps even a private partnership, public-private partnership.
Mr. Coleman?
Thank you for coming here tonight. Are municipal buildings grandfathered in ADA compliance?
No, they're not. So as an employer, and the town is an employer, it is obligated to address ADA requirements to its employees and to its customers. You're not grandfathered in, you're at risk, quite frankly. The ADA is a federal law, and it's administered by the Justice Department. Anybody could sue you. Well, people can sue you for anything, as I'm sure you're aware. But if someone who has a disability is not being served by your facility, and it could also be an employee who's not being served by your facility, you're subject to that lawsuit. So there's some risk.
Thank you. On the priority list, could you bring that slide back?
Sure.
Okay, you have upgrade the town hall, construct a new DPW garage, and construct a new main fire station. If I were to have a priority list by what I see in the town, the senior center would be the number one building to me, because the senior center as it sits is non-functional. The town hall is functional. The DPW garage is bordering as non-functional. Both the DPW garage and our senior center are embarrassments to our town, in my opinion. So as a priority, I would put those two first. Construct a new fire station. The fire station is functional. The other question I have, we're using some ARPA funding to do some kind of major upgrades to Fire Station 107, sleeping quarters. Not so sure if we should do those if we plan on building a new public safety complex. And DPW upgrades as well. I'm not so sure if I would do those if we plan on doing a new DPW garage. And I really feel that we need a new DPW complex and a new senior center. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Shaken. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Berthelot and Mr. Alsberger, and then Mr. Shaken.
Thank you. How much acreage did you say Vinton School had?
I think it's about 22 acres, maybe? Over 20.
22.7 acres.
I only asked that because of, I think back to when we were looking for a school site, and it turned out we just don't own that much property, and there's not that much my understanding at the time was that there wasn't too much developable property in town. So it seems like in some sense, holding on to Vinton or thinking of it, I mean, it's not ideally located for a lot of things because it's the southern part of town, but it is actually land we own. That's just tossing that out there. Thank you.
If you keep that facility, you have to maintain it or mothball it, and there's a cost associated with mothballing it. So
I just wonder if we can find another place for our fire departments. We might be able to. Ryan and others know a whole lot more than I do about other places, but that is a worry, actually, finding a place to build.
Mr. Alsberger?
Yeah, I just have three brief things. I think the municipal building, as it was built right around the same time as the three elementary schools, all maintain a sort of rural character of the town that people enjoy. I think selling the town on a three-story building might be a little tough. 207's location, be considered that there's a very large development that's going to go in right across the street from it, so its location is probably very key. And the senior center location as well. That's pretty much the heart of where our senior living is in town presently. And perhaps we just need to rebuild it or something, but pretty much that's where, not only that, but our ongoing development project that's going to be happening with affordable housing, which will be right across the street from it. So we kind of have like a little hub there of that type of housing and living space. So kind of keeping the senior center where their seniors are would probably makes the most sense, in my opinion. And thanks for all the work you did.
thank you.
Mr. Shaken?
Thanks. Can I ask a question about Goodwin and Vinton as potential swing space for a middle school renovation? I'm assuming there's a way to renovate the middle school without relocating students to another location. You said it might be more expensive and take a little longer. We're of the impression, and maybe it's a mistaken impression, that both of those buildings would need substantial investment to house students relatively, unless we started this renovation project like in the next year or two, to house students. And so I don't think we are planning on making that investment in those facilities at this stage. So I'm just curious if that was part of what you had considered. How long would students be there? What needs of the facility have? I mean, they're very much elementary schools, and they feel like it compared to the middle school in terms of having, kids being there. But I'm just curious if there are needs that we would need to address in order to use them that way.
I don't know much about the plan for renovating the middle school. I did discuss this very briefly with Alan Corson, who said, look, there's some, the middle school is not at capacity. So there could be some wiggle room within the middle school to do renovation piecemeal all the way around the building. And so Alan, I suspect, is not a fan of using the elementary schools as swing space. Nevertheless, knowing that it might come up as a question, I thought I should be able to answer the question, how many classes could they house, knowing that they were already configured as schools, and it would not be that expensive to just fix them up and continue to use them as swing space as schools. Using them as swing space for other purposes, let's say town hall renovation, could cost a whole lot more money. Swing space is not cheap, especially if you're converting a building that has one use into another use. So repartitioning that school into a number of offices, for example, with separate controls, and even if it's temporary HVAC, would not be cheap. It's the cheapest swing space is to use them as schools.
Mr. Aylesworth?
Yeah, just on this topic, I just want to be clear because I know how, the rumor mill can get started. So the school district is going through its own modernization study. To be clear, based on, and this study is not finalized, hasn't been released. So, again, I just want to emphasize, and I think Richard just said this a couple times, but, we're just being mindful of the fact that, not knowing exactly what may be in store for the middle school in the future. There are these scenarios where having, quote-unquote surplus schools would make sense. Certainly nothing I've heard from Superintendent Lyman at this point actually suggests that renovations that are being contemplated would actually require kids to leave the building. I think, as Richard just said, because the building is a little oversized for current enrollment, I'm sure every effort would be made to do renovations in a way that wouldn't actually require anybody to get out. So we're just thinking, again, regardless of what present circumstances might be or likely needs would be, actually to Councilor Berthelot's point, the town has a limited amount of acreage. And if you needed swing space for a school or some other purpose, it can be very hard to find. And so we're in unique circumstances where in the course of the next year, we are going to have 2 schools that are surplus. And so we're just trying to think both long-term and shorter to mid-term about what those needs would be.
I have a question about using those schools. When we were in the process of deciding whether or not to consolidate, one of the real issues was the condition of those buildings and their inadequacy for educational use under contemporary models. But also there were some serious problems about structural and other kinds of issues. Are you suggesting that we could use them for a long period of time, or, I mean, are they usable is really what my question is.
I remember Kelly's photographs, and I remember the reports, and I know I've been to both schools. You can't use them as is. You do have to put some money into them to use them at swing space, and I'm thinking no more than a year.
No more than a year, okay. Okay, and I think the other thing that you're recommending in these new constructions are in fact new constructions with a totally different style, so that we aren't going to be have the grammar school look anymore. It will be something quite different.
You're talking about the municipal building having grammar school look?
The municipal building, the senior center, the whole works.
Style is a whole other subject that's really beyond this. And I think you do have to think about what image, and
Right.
that comes much later. Once you decide what your priorities are for facility improvements, then you'll need to engage with those planners in a conversation about what the appropriate look is.
Okay. My other question has to do with functionality. I mean, we've been throwing this word around. It's some places not functional or is not efficient. When we're using the word functional, how do you understand that to mean?
Well, for instance, I would hope that a person who comes into town hall can easily find their way around. A receptionist, a traffic cop, or I don't mean a cop, but someone who can direct people. Oh, you want to go to the tax department? You'll go there. Or let me give you a phone number that you can call. Oh, if you have an appointment with the Board of Ed or the school department, this is where you go. That function doesn't exist right now. People stumble in and they either go to the north or east or west doors, and then they find themselves in the assessor's department, for example. So for newcomers, the town hall doesn't function as a first-time visitor to the town. And then you have people who are starting to escape their departments because you're out of space, and so now you're finding them across the hall. You have that occurring in Eastern Highlands. You have that occurring in the planning department. There's another planner who is down the hall. So that lack of face time, that lack of collaborative time, being able to grab someone and sit around the table, that function doesn't exist.
So when you're talking about fire departments, what does functional mean?
Safe, located so that they minimize their response time, and professional. I mean, they need space that provides the space for people to have their safety gear cleaned when they come back from an event, where they can bunk comfortably without being disturbed during their rest periods, and being able to drive through forward rather than back into your garage.
I understand also that there's some concern that there isn't a garage that's big enough to house our new Quint truck.
That's another issue. Some of your garage doors are way too low, so you're limited as to which bays you can put newer equipment. You have a great historic fire engine, by the way, but the newer equipment is bigger and taller.
Are we still using our historic fire engine, or is that the one that's down on the southern end of town? There is a great, at least one historic fire engine in town. Any other questions? Mr. Konchenberger?
Just real quick, on the, later on, as you continue to work on the study, is part of the project detailing to suggest or recommend a site for the new fires, a new fire station? I mean, I know that takes into account, a lot of different factors, population density and growth and roads.
I hope so, by the end of the study. But we've looked at the southern end of town, we've looked in the Four Corners area. We haven't landed on anything just
But that's something that later, eventually you'll,
It's part of the scope of this.
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there was a study by the fire department about response times and where it would be best to place a garage.
Yes, I have looked at that study.
Right. Okay, Mr. Aylesworth, followed by Mr. Shaken.
I'll just wait to close this out. You can call me.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask sort of a closeout question. So part of the thing I think I've been on the council 6 years, and we've been talking about your study happening and needing to happen, and a plan needing to be put in place. Part of it is we needed to wait until the new school sort of took priority in terms of our capital outlay. But part of what I think has made this so difficult is that there's needs everywhere, that we've never, in many, many years, we haven't sort of done a comprehensive evaluation of like this and put dollars behind fixing stuff. And so I guess I'm just sort of curious, there's a request in Ryan's budget for the next phase of this project. And so what is that? What is that going to entail? At what point, how long is it going to be before we start planning and then start building things and making those decisions? Because it's been a long time of sort of talking about it. And so what are the next steps?
I'd be happy to take a crack at that. Well, first I want to just thank, Richard and all his colleagues for all the work that, I think what it was sort of October 1-ish.
Through the winter.
Yeah, so we've been at this, better part of half a year anyway. And, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of information here, but I want to stress this really is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of concepts and ideas. And I've found Richard and his team, very responsive to all the different ideas, whether it's staff or other stakeholders he's come in contact with, just realizing that there really are so many different permutations and combinations of things that make sense. I think there is a lot of excitement, again, conceptually high level about the redevelopment of this campus, we'll call it. I know, like, to echo what Deputy Mayor was saying, I think it's certainly something that probably my first or second visit here, I thought, geez, it seems like there's a lot of potential here. There's sort of a, hate to say it, but underutilized, suboptimal use of this space is like an anchor of the downtown. And so we've kind of taken a lot of ideas and run with them. I definitely think, Councilor Kotchenberger's comments are spot on. We've talked a lot about, from a public safety standpoint, location. We've been looking at the existing fire study, a recent fire study, anticipating where the growth trends will be. Obviously, there seems to be now a lot of momentum in the Four Corners that was anticipated for years, but with this standard development coming online, whether it's the existing Station 207, which is a very tight site, or something in that general area, which is basically what the Fitch report spoke about, call it the northwestern part of town, having a presence there, talking about a 2-station versus a 3-station model. And so, what makes the most sense? These are all things that we're looking at a great deal. And as we continue to navigate phase 1, cost estimation, high-level cost estimation, getting a sense from you all and other stakeholders about what the priorities are, that's really going to dictate what happens in the next phase. So the next phase would be schematic design work. It would be identifying those projects that we really want to do, a more detailed mock-up, if you will, of site plans and construction or reconstruction of buildings. And ultimately, again, if there's support for moving in this direction, it would be during that schematic design phase where you take your really kind of ballpark, somewhat squishy cost estimates that come out of this phase and come up with more precise numbers that, again, if there was support for it, would be kind of the basis for your referendum vote, and just like happened with the new elementary school. So, there's a lot of work that lies ahead. There's a lot of work that's been done. The sort of higher level cost estimation, phase of this hasn't really happened yet. We've kind of thrown maybe some numbers around, but Richard and his team haven't really focused on that yet. So as he started off by saying, I'll just reiterate now, certainly, feedback from you all in the days and weeks ahead about that's been discussed and is seemingly kind of bubbling up as priorities. We want to make sure that we efficiently apply his team's energies in a direction that there seems to be some support for. We don't want him to go down a rabbit hole of concepts that are total non-starters, if there are any. So thank you, Richard.
It might help at some point if the council spent a little bit of time developing its own priorities for construction, so that we would have a framework to operate from. And just discussing and kind of getting ourselves familiar with concepts that are new, because new concepts are always hard for us to swallow. I think we really could use a little bit of time for example, if we said one of our real priorities is a senior center, then under that, what's the next priority? That it stay where it is, that it have access to the community center, that it that it have access to people who don't live in the supported housing that's up there, but live around town. I mean, there's a lot of issues which we need to begin to think about before we can begin to say that's a good idea or that's not a good idea. People always have to go through the process before they get to the end. And if we're just presented with an end result, we're never going to get there. Because we've got to work our way to the end as well. Strasburger.
Mayor, are you suggesting a series or perhaps a workshop or two, or?
At least one, yes, where we sit down and begin to think about, is it more important for the fire department to have 3-minute response times, or is it more important for every senior in town to be able to get to a community center within 3 minutes? I mean, there are lots of questions here. Is preserving the Storrs Grammar School, that's name is up on the wall, more important than having a modern and efficient building? I think we just need to begin to think through those things. Mr. Coleman and Ms. Berthelot.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with what you're saying. I think it would be great if the council could take field trips to the facilities to get a better idea what we're looking at. Thank you.
Ms. Berthelot.
I appreciate that perspective, but in a sense, absent the sort of expertise of sort of whether or not a building can be saved. And I mean, I think that these two, I mean, maybe they need to be happening
Yes.
at the same time. And it's not just our ideas, of course, it's, getting community input on these concepts and community buy-in. But I mean, I imagine we've all been thinking about this. I mean, we haven't maybe been talking about it, but I hope we've all been thinking about it. We've been telling the town manager forever, get this done. We want this, so it shouldn't be new to us that these questions are going to be pressing. How we schedule a time to talk about it, I don't think we're necessarily even going to agree on the answers.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the work that's been done immensely, and think that we really need to pay attention to what the expert has told us as well in terms of whether buildings can be saved. Thanks.
Mr. Asperger?
Well, I believe that, within his presentation there was a discussion of renovation into housing. I imagine the buildings must be viable.
Well, part of the question is, I mean, they were viable to be renovated for schools, but it would have cost as much as a brand-new school?
That's the question. At what cost?
At what cost? Yeah. Mr. Aylesworth?
Just perhaps one last point, because I get the sense we're going to be transitioning to something else. I meant to say a moment ago that, we all recognize, I think it's self-evident, that whether we're talking about the full gamut of things that Richard just presented on, or a subset of, or something that's phased, regardless, we're talking about significant monetary cost and investment. And along those lines, I just want to stress that from my standpoint, Richard and I talk about this, quite a bit. I like to look at it as we want to figure out what are we investing in, not just what are we, absorbing a lot of cost to do. And what I mean by that is, so talking about, for example, any construction, reconstruction, redevelopment of this site, what could that mean in terms of return on investment for the town and the downtown? So how would whatever those dollars, whatever they end up being, if that was a project we pursued, how could they be leveraged in a way that promoted additional economic development, visitation, ancillary uses, I hate to use the word synergies, but the synergies with the adjacencies with other uses across 195, across 275, depending on what UConn does, proximity to the community center, proximity to E.O. Smith. Richard kind of flew over it, but, I think there is a lot of shared interest in a parking solution as an example. It's not necessarily a glamorous topic, but, UConn, EO, the town. One of the things I hear about pretty much weekly, what are we doing about parking? What are we doing about parking? And so rather than operate in a siloed, in a silo, in a vacuum, I think we have an opportunity to really open up conversation with our neighbors and figure out how do we work on this together? And in doing so, potentially, how do we lighten some of the financial burden that any individual entity, quote unquote, has to absorb to solve its problem? But I really do want to stress that we're trying to view these as targeting the right investments in the town's future.
Question. You again.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for all the work. All right, the next item on our agenda is a proclamation recognizing child care providers. Ms. Berthelot.
Move to authorize the mayor to issue the attached proclamation in recognition of Child Care Providers Appreciation Day. Would you like me to read it before we get a second, or?
Well, let's get a second first. Mr. Bruder seconds. All right. Read the proclamation, please.
Proclamation, Town of Mansfield, Connecticut. Whereas Child Care Aware of America and other organizations nationwide are recognizing child care providers on this day. And whereas over half the children under the age of 6 nationwide are estimated to spend some time in a non-parental care arrangement on a weekly basis, which provides critical enrichment opportunities and nurtures development for children of all backgrounds and is a vital building block of our state economy. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has created tremendous hardship for child care providers and the families of Connecticut who depend on them, who have continued to meet the needs of families while risking their health and financial stability to remain open. And whereas the town of Mansfield recognizes these hardships and has provided much needed relief to providers to help sustain the viability of child care during the pandemic. And whereas our future depends on the quality of the early childhood experiences provided to young children today, support for high-quality child care represents a worthy commitment to our children's future. Now, therefore, I, Antonia Moran, by virtue of the authority vested in me as Mayor of Mansfield, Connecticut, do hereby proclaim May 6, 2022, as Provider Appreciation Day in the town of Mansfield, and urge all citizens to recognize child care providers for their important work. In witness whereof, I have set my hand and caused the seal of the town of Mansfield to be affixed on the 11th day of April in the year 2022.
You wish to speak to your motion?
I do, thank you. Child care providers give an enormous amount to our community, and they have historically been undervalued and underpaid. And there's a great deal of burnout because of that. And they make it such that young families and older families with young children or grandchildren that they're taking care of, they make it so that people can go to work. They also make it such that children have early educational experiences where research shows it increases the likelihood that they'll succeed educationally. And when people succeed educationally, obviously, they're more likely to succeed in the long term. So it's been a wonderful thing that we as a town have long supported childcare. And this is a great time right now because of the hardship of COVID-19 to say again, without reservation, that support will continue.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to Mr. Bruder?
Just to briefly piggyback on what my colleague, Councilor Berthelot, has said, I'm in full agreement and hope that we can pass this proclamation.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it has been adopted unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the acceptance of the Community Challenge Grant and allocation of ARPA funding. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As the council's aware, we pushed out some communication on this late last week. The town got some pretty amazing news in the last week. You'll all recall back in January, going before January is when we actually applied for the funding, but going back some weeks or months before that, we learned of this new emerging grant program, Connecticut Communities Challenge Grant Program, that was being funded with federal dollars, whether it was Rescue Plan or CARES Act from before that, I'm not 100% sure, but this was a new grant program that was being administered at the state level through the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. And so we thought about our needs, and we knew that there seemed to be, based on the grant sort of application literature and the funding summaries, seemed to be a lot of focus on what would be urban or suburban sort of projects. We probably all thought that, Little Mansfield might not fare well. We might have thought that our application was a moonshot, but we also thought that, there might be an opportunity to make some lemonade from lemons. And we were coming off, as everybody knows, a pretty rough summer with UConn and the sort of state of play with UConn and some hard feelings about things that had played out. And I guess we all dared to dream and thought this might be an opportunity for us to try to support a project that was already well underway, the Eagleville Green Project, but think a little bigger, a little broader about something that's kind of transformational in nature for the whole stretch of South Eagleville Road, 275 that's out in front of us, and of course help get this project, which I'll be frank, seemed to have a very uncertain financial future, help hopefully pave the way for better things. And so we reached out to UConn. We said this might be something that we're all collectively able to row in the same direction on. UConn was supportive of lending its support for the project, and we submitted an application, which again, I know I thanked Linda Painter in the email I pushed out to everybody, but I also, I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Derek Delay, the assistant town engineer. Really, he and Linda, it was a collaborative effort. Town officials, our partners, but really Derek and Linda soldiered through, carried a lot of water on this project. And so I want to stress that I think, we should all be in their debt for their just stick-to-itiveness and helping get this grant across the finish line. But fast forward to present time, the council, you'll recall, while you gave support to the application, it was qualified support, I guess I would call it that. Perhaps everybody was on the council was a little dubious about how this application might play out. And so there is some additional work to be done, some clarifications of previous motions, some new motions, some fresh motions that are in your packet if you're so inclined to accept this funding, which, again, is part of a larger project that's transformational in nature for this part of town and will go a long way in helping us achieve affordable housing goals. I certainly join with staff in hoping that the council will, offer its full-throated support for this. It's a significant amount of resources for us to do something that's, once in a generational opportunity to do it. We appreciate UConn's support for this project. And if Linda is still there, I think I saw her activate her camera a second ago. If there's anything, Linda, I'm leaving out, the floor is yours.
I think you covered it all, Ryan. Thank you.
Taken.
Couple of questions. So I think this is great news. I'm very happy to see that we got it. The sort of scope of the project is outlined in our packet. So I just have some questions about the finances. I believe that we have already allocated this $900,000 chunk of dollars from ARPA that we've already chosen to say go on the support of the Eagleville Green project, which is $750,000 of that. And then we are essentially out of this request making our first withdrawal from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for another $150,000 to support the construction of the project. So I just want to be clear that that's what y'all are asking us to do this evening, correct?
That's a key piece of it. Another piece of it is $480,000 in capital improvement funds, which
I was going to get to
yep,
that next,
yep.
so
But
ARPA first.
ARPA, yes, the way you've outlined it is correct. It's $900,000 total, $750,000 the original that you articulated, as well as the first $150,000 withdrawal, if you want to call it that, from monies you put in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Oh, and it looks like Linda has something to say.
Linda? Ms. Painter?
I just wanted to clarify. I don't think you were putting that 500,000 into the trust fund just because of some issues with the way ARPA funding,
Right.
the ARPA funding rules. So you had
Right.
$500,000 reserved tentatively for
Right.
affordable housing initiative. So this would be taking 150,000 of that to put directly towards the Eagleville Green project. I just want to
Yes,
be clear because I
The
know there were
mechanics of
some.
that, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sort of answers my second question, which was, we've set a policy for ourselves, which I generally think is not the best idea, about spending dollars out of the Housing Trust Fund, and we haven't even established that advisory group yet, so we are breaking that policy with the first expenditure, which is why I don't think they're a good idea, because the council can do whatever it wants, regardless of what a previous council told them to do. But be that as it may, I think this is clearly money after a good end, and if we aren't technically depositing these dollars into the trust fund, then maybe we technically aren't violating our own policy. The second question is about the CIP. So there's $480,000 of capital funds for pedestrian safety and roadway improvements. Number one, are any of those expenditures built into the manager's proposed budget for the next fiscal year? And I guess relatedly, sort of number two, if so or if not, do we need to do all of these things in the next fiscal year? Are we thinking about a future outlay much in the following fiscal year, or what?
So I think the short answer to your question is I don't think that a great deal of this $480,000, there are some monies in terms of pedestrian safety improvements, the signalized, the controlled crosswalks. There still would be additional funds needed. I guess one question, and I'd actually intended to ask Linda this earlier today rather than have it play out in a council meeting the way it is now, but here it goes. If the motion is passed the way that it's laid out, and hypothetically, the council, which hasn't rendered its final decisions on a number of potential uses of the remaining ARPA funds, if the council so chose, hypothetically, to use additional ARPA funds in lieu of capital improvement funds for this as a substitute, does a vote on the motion, or a motion as constructed in the packet, does that create any sort of a problem?
So Ryan, I think that was a question
I was
for me,
directing that
correct?
to you, yeah.
Okay, so I think this was what was laid out in the application. So we may also have to amend with the Department of Economic and Community Development. I think their main concern is that that we're committing that that full total. I'm not sure, while it was laid out and identified as CIP funds in our application, I think if we decided to allocate more ARPA funds, I don't think DECD would have an issue with that, and that it may be an amendment in the future. I did also just want to clarify that under financial impact in the agenda item summary, we did identify what is basically already been approved for CIP funds that could be put towards this project, what is requested in the current budget, and then what you need to budget in the future. And in answer to Deputy Mayor Sakin's question, no, this is not something that we would need all of this in the current fiscal year. This is going to take time to design and
Wait. Ms. Painter,
construct.
would you say that sentence again? It came through kind of garbled, and I didn't hear each of your words.
So I was just saying, I believe Deputy Mayor Shakin had asked if these funds all needed to be essentially allocated in this current fiscal year. And my answer to that would be no. We believe that you would have time to allocate in future CIP years the funds for this. What you do need to do essentially is commit to DECD that you will provide that match funding that was identified in the application.
And the residual is $233,000. It's not currently in the CIP plan.
Mr. Shakin?
Right, I was just gonna, if you read the financial impact, which I should have more closely, it says right now there's $233,000 of this that is not in our next year's budget that we would be committing in future
In
years,
future years.
From some funding source, which, as Linda said, could be CIP or
something else.
Yep.
Or something else.
Thank you.
Would somebody like to make this motion, Mr. Bruder?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to formally accept the $4,854,595 Communities Challenge Grant awarded by the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development on April 6, 2022, and to commit the following funds as part of the local match: $900,000 of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, $800,000 of Federal Highway Fast Act SAFE grant funds, and $480,000 of the Capital Improvement Program funds.
Ms. Berthelot? Seconding, okay. I would like to say that in the announcement, the informal announcement of this grant allocation, what we learned was that there were 50 applications and that our staff had put together a proposal that hit all of the requirements of the grant program, and that there were very few grant applications that actually addressed what the grant writers, what the program writers had been intending. So we actually, not only is this a deserving project, but our grant writers are very skillful at understanding what funders are looking for and making sure that our projects match their needs. So congratulations to the folks who put this project together, as well as everybody else. And of course, much thanks to our partners who supported this. Would you like to speak to your motion, Mr. Bruder?
If you don't mind, Mayor.
Please.
I think that what you have said, I would like to piggyback on, because this is a great source of funding towards the total costs. See that in our packet, it's listed just under $20 million. We have a little bit ways to go, but as you said, this is a big chunk of that. And as we've seen throughout our meetings and with the amount of volunteers trying to join our affordable housing committee that just is getting started so that they can start allocating and making recommendations for funding from our housing trust fund. I think that this was a really good way to step in that right direction.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on this motion? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Ron, I didn't look at you, but you raised your hand too. Okay, good. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the congressional earmark funding requests. Mr. Aylesworth.
So about this time last year, staff came before the council and alerted you all that congressional earmarks were back after a many years hiatus. Congressman Courtney had put out, just as all members of Congress did, basically calls for proposals to his constituents and municipalities and organizations in his district, laying out different funding categories. Last year there was actually a couple different broader categories of project tracks, if you will. One was funding through the planned funding through the multi-year transportation infrastructure bill, and so we applied through that funding vehicle for what is a little over a $3 million project to create a multi-use trail, a 10-foot wide trail extending from Middle Turnpike in the Four Corners, or the intersection of Middle Turnpike and 195, and extending down to Tower Loop Road. Students and others, pedestrians are relatively seen walking in the road to get from Tower Loop Road up to the Four Corners, and that's not a safe situation. in any state, but certainly not later at night after some fun socializations happened. And given that we know, we knew this last year when we applied, but given that the demand for pedestrian safety is only going to increase with expected growth in the Four Corners, including the standard project, which will add upwards of 400 new beds and the foot traffic that comes with it. We're looking to reapply this year because, unfortunately, last year, while the project was selected by Congressman Courtney's office, one of 10 that moved forward, and we thought we had been selected and would be receiving federal funding. Unfortunately, it was a much, I'll call it, skinnier version of the transportation bill that got passed. And so the long and the short of it is our project and all the projects in Courtney's district unfortunately fell by the wayside. And so we're being told now, don't deter, reapply, pursue other sources of federal funding, and particularly this project, we have every reason to believe that the congressman still strongly supports it. So with that preamble, we are back before the council to get the council's support to reapply. It's a slightly different template this year, but it's largely the same routine or exercise as it was last year, looking for the same amount of money. This is, sorry, it's I guess a little bit more this year. It's a little over $3 million project. This is an 80-20 cost share. And so we're looking for the council's support to submit an application to Congressman Courtney's office. Applications are due April 15th, which happens to be Good Friday.
Mr. Osberger. Sure. Oh, on page 72.
I move to authorize the town manager to submit an application for community project congressional earmark funding for a multi-use trail from the intersection of US Route 44 and Connecticut 195 in Mansfield, Connecticut, proceeding south to Tower Loop Road, with the understanding that the town will be required to provide matching funds equal to 20% of the overall costs of the submitted project. The mayor shall authorize to submit a letter of support for the proposed project on behalf of the town council.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Coleman. And Mr. Katzenberger and Mr. Shuren. So, Mr. Osberger, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I would. Thank you, Mayor. As a lifelong resident of Mansfield, and in particular the Four Corners area, I would have to agree with Mr. Aylesworth in his assessment that it is a dangerous section through there. It is certainly quite narrow. I know that there has been some fatalities of pedestrians in there in the past, and I think this is a wonderful project and long overdue.
Well, thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? Mr. Katzenberger.
I mean, I agree. I certainly support this as well. My one question, I guess, or comment is I think we, not intentionally, but we understate really the problem, particularly at night. I mean, it's actually, I don't say this lightly, it's actually very scary at times to see, because the lighting is terrible. There can be dozens of students. They may or may not be drinking, but it is a bad situation. I had a one sentence change to the draft letter. I don't know, to emphasize this a little more. And this would be on page 77, the second to the last paragraph. Paragraph begins, while these projects, and then the last sentence I would just have, and I can, if people like this, I can give the precise text to Sarah Ann later. Pedestrians frequently walk in the travel lane already, and several nights a week while the university is in session. Hundreds of students utilize CT 195 to walk to and from Four Corners and the main campus, creating particularly hazardous situations, period.
I'm sorry, where do you want to put that?
Yeah, so on page 77, and it's the second to the last paragraph, the paragraph begins, while these projects will provide, and then the last sentence, which says pedestrians are often observed. I replaced that sentence with the one I just read.
Read it again, please.
Pedestrians frequently walk in the travel lane already, and several nights a week while the university is in session, hundreds of students utilize Connecticut 195 to walk to and from Four Corners in the main campus, be it in particularly hazardous situations, period.
Will the maker of the motion accept that sentence as a friendly amendment?
I will.
Mr. Aylesworth, are you comfortable with that amendment?
I am.
Okay. Does anybody object to the addition of that sentence? All right, then you've got your sentence. Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, I have one question. I certainly support this project. I'm just curious, who would be responsible for the snow removal and upkeep of that section of walk?
Well, the town maintains sidewalks, so it would be a town maintenance matter.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are we ready to vote? Ms. Painter, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to note that question regarding the snow removal. There may be some policies regarding that it's property owner responsibility. I think there are some sidewalks that we
In that part of town?
maintain,
Okay.
but it may depend. That would be a question for Public Works, but I do believe there may be some policies in our ordinance related to snow removal and property owner responsibilities.
So a lot will obviously adhere to all local ordinances that are applicable.
Okay. Mr. Carrington?
I was under the assumption we would maintain it like all the other trails in town.
That was my assumption too, but
Okay.
because I think we talked about this last year.
Yes.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Passed unanimously. Oh, boy, we are really cooking tonight. Yes. Well, let's do something that's more environmentally friendly. Cooking with solar, all right? All right. Next comes the transfers from the current year's budget from our pilot funding, and this is a recommendation that comes from the Finance Committee. So, Mr. Konchenberger.
Okay, thank you. And the memo of notes, and this is a good situation to be in, but as usual, we budget conservatively, particularly when pilot is up, the exact pilot amount is up in the air. We did so previously, and as the memo notes, our estimate, the amount of pilot we received was a little over $4 million more than what we had budgeted. So what this proposal is that we used a little over $2 million of this money, or perhaps more, depending on what we do with the road. We use much of this money for specific, largely public works projects or highway projects. And if you look at page 84 of the packet, you'll see 17 proposals. And most of them public works, but as well as road improvement. And we talked about it at finance, and the thought was that, I think at least, that it is, because this is money that which should be, is not, we could roll it into next year's budget proposal, but it is cleaner because the money came in this year to allocate it this year. And certainly doesn't have any negative implications either way of how we do it. I'll turn it over to Charmaine for any additional, or Ryan for any additional discussion.
Yeah, I'll let Charmaine speak to this as well, but as Mr. Konchenberger said, when we budgeted this year for state aid, while there was every reason to hope that our circumstances were going to be changing a lot with pilot funds, it wasn't a guarantee until after the budget was passed. And so, we did set a mill rate that reflected a lesser amount of pilot funding assumptions. So we do find ourselves with a surplus, if you will. And just as I said to the Finance Committee, everything basically that's on this list, it's being proposed to utilize surplus pilot funds now. These are all things that were actually part of the various departments' capital improvement requests for next year. And so we kind of scrutinized these numbers, and we looked at things that we might be able to move into this year and kind of get off the book, so to speak, for next year, just to lighten the load a little bit. And so that's where we arrived. And I think that it balances a number of different needs, both shorter and long term, in terms of, you know, how much fund balance we have or how much underutilized pilot funds become fund balance next year, as well as ensuring that our fund balance in the capital non-recurring fund, the CNR's fund balance, is maintained at a healthy level, anticipating future out-year capital investments. But Charmaine, I'll turn it over to you.
You're
Muted.
muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Actually, that's a very good summary of basically the exercise that took place to get us to this point. And again, the goal is to have this addressed at this point to make the process of going through the fiscal year 22-23 budget review very clean, whereas we would have put to bed this fiscal year for the most part, knowing what we know at this point now, as we would have with any other budget year. You start off with a foundation of the current fiscal year being in good order, or at least at a point where you understand what's happening in that current fiscal year as a springboard to the next fiscal year's budget development. So all of these items, as Ryan indicated, came to, bubble to the surface as we went through the exercise of building fiscal year 22-23 budget over the course of the past several months. And these are also items that both DPW, facilities, and finance understand that can be done now. Like, we can start the process now and get these things underway, and therefore not be required to wait until July 1st when the new budget is available after it's been approved.
Thank you. Mr. Katchenberger, there are 5 motions, and I think you need to read them each one, but let's vote on them as a whole.
Okay, so I'll read all 5.
Yes.
Okay.
I will point out that these new allocations will allow the town to begin some road improvements that we have been talking about for the past several meetings earlier than would have happened otherwise. So.
And these motions are on page 85 of the packet. I move effective April 11th, 2022, to increase the fiscal year 2021-2022 pilot revenue line item appropriation by $2,422,000, funded by the additional state pilot grant. I move effective April 11th, 2022, to increase the fiscal year 2021-22 general fund transfer to capital CNR by $2,080,000, funded by the additional state pilot grant. I move effective April 11th, 2022, to amend the capital non-reoccurring fund and the capital improvement program fund budgets to fund projects 1 through 14 noted above in this memorandum. I move effective April 11th, 2022, to amend the fiscal year 2021-22 general fund transfer to Parks and Rec by $192,000, funded by the additional state pilot grant. And finally, I move effective April 11th, 2022, to amend the fiscal year 2021-22 general fund by adding a new account to the legislative section of the general government budget with an appropriation of $150,000, funded by the additional state pilot grant.
All right, this doesn't need a second. Would you like to speak to your motion? If there's anything additional?
I think yes, I mean, certainly any questions or comments, but
Okay.
I think we've addressed it.
Mr. Osberger.
As written.
Is probably a typo, is that what you said?
I think it's just the legislative section.
What's that?
I think there's a stray HE, it's just the legislative section.
Thanks. Just a note for the council. If you're paying close attention, you'll note that there's $4 million of state pilot funds, and this is a recommendation to allocate 2.4 of them, and so that leaves about 1.6 unallocated that if we do nothing, will move into fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. Ryan's budget is built off of the assumption that those funds will move into fund balance, but as counselors are thinking about changes to his budget, they should note that there will be an additional 1.6 million in surplus from these funds in the current fiscal year that could potentially fund other priorities that are not on this list. One example that comes to mind is we're all aware that there was a recent culvert collapse on Hunting Lodge Road. The road is closed for safety reasons right now, and that project is estimated to cost about $500,000. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that at a future meeting, but just a heads up that there's 1.6 million left over that we're not allocating tonight.
Mr. Coleman.
If we adopt this motion tonight, are we also adopting how it's spent on page 84?
Yes.
I can't support this motion unless the entire amount goes to road repairs. Judging by the amount of complaints by our citizens, I think the lion's share or the whole share should go to road repairs and improvements.
Any other comments? Mr. Shaken for the second time?
Yeah, thanks. Just a note on that. While they're broken out by a number of different areas, the vast majority of these funds are going towards public works. There's $500,000 on this list to Cape Seal road resurfacing, which the public works director talked about when he was here a few weeks ago. And then items 1 through 9, 11, and 12 are all things that are related in one way or another. I guess that's not entirely true. Item 3, 4, 7, 8, 11, 12 are all things that are related to our public works department that I'm sure the skid steer, for example, will be used as part of our road repair, speed signs, guardrails. So a bulk of this money is going towards road repair. I recognize there's other funds in here that are not, but we are directing a significant portion of these dollars into capital expenditures that will improve our town's roads that we're doing now so that we have room to fund other things, including significant investment in the roads in the next fiscal year budget.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Chain, Mr. Konchenberger?
So simply to note that if we look at 16, the CNR fund contribution, well, that's obviously not allocated until we do the budget. Much of that, I mean, that can also be used. That, you know, that's not, it can be used for road or other services or needs we have, but that's not taken out of the road part. It simply hasn't been allocated yet.
Mr. Osberger?
Although I do agree with Ben's assessment of this overall discussion here, I will have to agree with Mr. Coleman on this. After having heard from enough townspeople, we really should be allocating as much as possible that we possibly can. And so for that reason, I will probably vote no.
Ms. Chain, would you call the roll, please?
Osberger,
No.
Berthelot,
Yes.
Bruder,
Yes.
Coleman,
No.
Kotchenberger,
Yes.
Moran,
Yes.
Curran,
Yes.
Shaken.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda is reports of council committees. Finance, do you have anything additional to add?
The one, and we spent much of the time on that, but there are other, we also had, we had a report from our auditor, and I'm just trying to, I just want to get to the, I'm using the correct terms. Marked isn't well. So we had, as we know, the auditor, this is for the June, as of June 30th, 2021, the presentation for the previous fiscal year by auditor, which used to be Booten Shapiro, but now merged with Clifton, Larson, and Allen. I'll make it very quick and we can talk about it more. It is a completely clean audit. There were no problems found, which is a tribute to our staff, I think, as well as, particularly in this difficult time. And no specific recommendations made in terms of improving or concerns noted, other than, as we know, because we talked about this months ago, that we were unable to get our final report in within the deadline issue that numerous towns had, but nevertheless, that was the one negative, if that's the term. Everything else was positive, and there was no need for corrections.
Mr. Shaken?
Can I just add, if folks are looking through the finance packet, that this will be on our agenda in weeks for the council's approval.
And I believe that the delay was mutually agreed upon because the auditing firm also was having difficulties getting its work done in
Yes,
time.
and with the expanded, not only the Mansfield with the additional this financial software changes, but also with the various federal and state funds that came in that required additional time.
Okay, personnel, do you have?
We have not met.
There we go. Mr. Sharon, do you have a report from personnel?
We have not met.
Okay,
No.
thank you. Ms. Berthelot, Committee on Committees?
We've not met either.
Okay. Anything on departmental and advisory committee reports? Anything on petitions, requests, and communications? Mr. Coleman?
I'd like to recognize the Lions Club email and request regarding ARPA funding. I hope that we can consider that in our future ARPA funding discussions.
Thank you. I wonder if they were considered as part of our $68,000 grant.
$8,000.
The grants to
Oh.
agencies?
I don't believe they were on that list. You'll recall, though, there's as proposed, $350,000 of funding for social service agencies, nonprofits. So those funding decisions have all yet to be determined, will be determined by the council with recommendations from Human Services Advisory Committee. So there's opportunity, certainly, for the council to consider such a request.
And this letter will be forwarded to them as well.
Yes.
Mr. Shaken?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention Attorney Deneen's letter in the packet. There had been some conversation in past council meetings about councilors voting on issues where they served on boards of directors of local nonprofits, whether in their capacity as council members or otherwise, and questions about whether that was a violation of our code of ethics. And Attorney Deneen has looked into it, it appears, and said that no, as council has been acting, is correct, that unless a public official has a financial interest in the transaction or contract that the council is voting on, that their participation in their democratic duty as a councilor does not constitute a conflict of interest.
And that financial interest is defined as a financial interest of themselves or their families, and there's some definition in the code about what constitutes financial advantages. Okay, anything else on petitions, requests, and communications? Anything for future agendas? Mr. Kachenberger?
In some ways, it's simply a question, but as we were looking at in the fair housing policy and resolution, one of the things, of course, is identifying obstacles. And in other areas I'm working on, one of the major concerns I have is the increased use of criminal history data, including arrests and violations of ordinances, which can impact numerous things, including employment, but also housing and access to credit and insurance. I don't know first of all, how we utilize it in town, but that would be the question. When do we ask, if at all, for criminal history background? Employment applications. But I'm also thinking specifically to the extent that I don't know if we design our own application
I
forms.
believe the state passed a law that you can't ask for criminal
I
backgrounds.
don't think one state did. I don't think it was us.
I think we did.
Connecticut?
Yeah.
Well, it's used in a number of areas. Though. It's used
For job applications
Okay.
specifically.
Right, okay, so that's good. But I was thinking more specifically of housing. I don't know if we create, so it's, again, it's a question. I don't know if we use our own application forms for the housing that we help promote, or whether they're state issued, in which case we probably can't do a whole lot about it other than in the state. But to the extent that we do have control over what information we're asking, I would like to know where we're asking for criminal history data, and then question on whether that is necessary and appropriate. In some cases, it may be, but
So maybe we can ask the town manager to include that in his
Yeah.
report. Fine, thank you. Mr. Coleman?
Future agendas, I'd like to see Southeast School site conditions. Town manager provide us with more information. I would like to open that all up to the public and discussion.
Are you talking about the site for the new school or the site where the old school resides?
The site of the new school and the old school, the one and the same.
All right. I think there is in the manager's report, a report on that site, and it is available to the public. There's a link to be found directly to it. I followed it myself. There are 8 or more documents in that were used by the school architects and construction companies. So I don't know whether we need to bring that to full public debate because access is available. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some environmental studies have come to light. I would discuss the environmental studies that were done prior to the construction that Mr. Ellsworth provided to the council this evening.
Mr. Shaken?
I think the town manager sent us an email today. I don't think what he sent us is in a council packet or his report.
Yeah, it is in his report.
I think, yeah, I don't know, I think I mentioned that information, because actually, I'd have to timestamp my report. When I was working on the report, I think the information may have been finalized even after the publication of the report. It's about
Okay, so
simultaneous.
an email.
My suggestion is the summary that was in the email should be in a communication to
Yep.
the council,
Yes.
and with a link to all the data if anyone wants to look at it, and it puts it on our agenda if there's other things council members want to talk.
Fine, thank you. Anything else? The next item is a motion to adjourn. Would somebody like to so move? Coleman moves, Mr. Osberger seconds. Why are those guys always the first ones out of the room? I don't know. We got a third over here. Okay. Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning, raise your hand. Thank you.
Can I abstain?
You thirded. You can't
Recording
abs-
stopped.